Hi there. I'm grateful to be with you and to be continuing our series on the spirituality of the 12 steps. And this is just specially recorded for those of you who are listening online, because I can feel like I can connect with you better this way than just doing the regular recorded service. So I'm grateful that you're listening and would love to hear from you. So just reach out if you want to. You can get me at babs@journeysac.com. That's BABS at journeysac.com. All right, so we're going to continue on. Just as always, I'm going to just put out my disclaimers first, that I'm sharing my experience, strength, and hope related to the 12 steps in spirituality. Please take what you like and leave the rest. Second, that I believe that all of us as human beings are quote-unquote addicted or powerless over something or some things. We all have something or things in our life, even if it's our habitual way of thinking, that we are powerless over. And then the third one is that I love and follow Jesus. And I believe that God, Christ, higher power, creator, the universe, spirit, is bigger than anything my human mind can fathom. So I use those terms interchangeably and with gender inclusivity. And again, like I said earlier, this series is meant to be interactive. So please do reach out, utilize it in your life, and let us know how it's going. All right, so just a quick recap of where we've been. We're working on step 6, but let's start off with step 1. We admitted that we were powerless over you fill in the blank, and that our lives had become unmanageable. And it's a step about honesty. Step 2 came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could, and I add wants to, restore us to sanity, which is a step of hope. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. And that is a step of faith and surrender. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Definitely a step of courage. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step of integrity. And 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, which is a step about willingness, which we're going to talk about today. Again, so step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Like I said, it's a step about willingness, a willingness to let God change me and to remove those defects of character that were uncovered in steps 4 and 5. And a willingness to practice the opposite positive action. We'll unpack that a little bit later as we get on to this step. The verse that is a keystone verse for me related to this step comes from Philippians 2, verse 13. It says, "For it is not your strength, but it is God who is effectively at work in you, both to will and to work, that is, strengthening, energizing, and creating in you the longing and the ability to fulfill your purpose." Again, this is a step of willingness and our willingness to cooperate with God, but it's not on our strength that our character defects get removed from us. So as I see it, there's 2 parts to this step. Part 1 is we're entirely ready. So that's the part about our willingness to let go of my old coping mechanisms, my old way of getting my needs met. And we uncovered what those things were in our steps 4 and 5 when we did our inventories, and we looked at our fears, our wrongs, and the things that were our part. The EA Big Book has this great quote that I'm going to read for you. It says, "Behind our resentments, fears, and wrongs, we discovered some defects of character. These defects of character are our negative habits of thinking and acting, our automatic reactions to life, our ineffective behaviors. Often we are surprised to find how difficult it is to actually change our thought patterns, attitudes, and behaviors. And so we are so comfortable with some of our defects that we do not even want to think about getting rid of them." This is the part of willingness. And as I look at that, I think of a friend of mine who was sharing her story when we were talking about step 6. One of her defects of character was her negative habit of thinking and acting that we talked about there was like impatience. Like, she would be so impatient for so many things. And the example that she gave me that I thought was great was like she would need to do banking. This was back before we had like mobile banking and stuff like that. She had to do some banking. But when she got to the bank, there were all these people there and cars lined up. And she just got so frustrated and so pissed off that she just left and didn't do the banking that she was supposed to have done that day. And so that's how ineffective her behavior was. Her character defect in that instance was impatience. And what she needed to do with that was practice the opposite of it, was to practice being willing to practice the opposite behavior, that opposite behavior of patience. So she slowly but slowly would go to places that had lines, and she would just bite her tongue, but she'd put herself in positions where she would have to continue to practice and practice and practice. And like in my own life, an example that I can think of was like some of my parenting decisions. For me, it was like, it's also impatience, but also control. I wanted to get things done, but I had these little kids and I was frustrated because their little agendas didn't allow me to get my stuff done. So it came out like the resentment was against myself and my parenting, and it came out like the character defect again of impatience and also arrogance. So the opposite action was I had to be entirely ready. First, before I got to the opposite action, I had to be entirely ready to say, okay, am I willing to allow God? Am I willing to allow my higher power to remove my desire for wanting it my way, my desire for my control? Am I willing to allow God to slowly work on that? Or if he wanted to, automatically leave it. But it also meant that I had to be willing to practice patience, to be willing to sit and be present and do what I needed to do without foisting my agenda on my kids. And so I had to look at that. Well, was I really willing to do that? And sometimes I had to pray to be willing to be willing. Sometimes there were some things that I wasn't willing to be willing to let go of. For the longest time, I wasn't willing to let go of my need for control over my health, which is a character defect. It's my own pride and ego and control. I had to eventually be praying. I had to put it in there, to be willing to let it go. And eventually I got to a place where it was okay, where I became willing. And that was the point where I was entirely ready. This is a step that we practice throughout our life. It's not something that we're going to do perfectly and do all at once. More things will come and more will be revealed as we continue on in the program. But we become entirely ready for different things at different times, but we keep working towards it. We don't want to say no, never. When I say no, never, that's when I'm not practicing step 6. If I'm still willing to be willing, then I am practicing that step. So I'm working on becoming entirely ready. And there were some things definitely that I was entirely ready to get rid of. And that's when we start to go to part 2, was that to have God remove all these defects of character. That's where it is that first part of that verse that we read earlier. For it's not your strength, but it is God who's effectively at work in you. The point for this is that God is removing these defects of character. It's not me who's removing those. Like growing up, I was pull myself up by the bootstraps. I can do this. I can do anything, But this is also yet another ego reducer and saying, no, I can't remove these defects of character. It is God inside of me, working in me, that removes the defects of character. And yet there is still in this part, the second part of it, where we do have to allow God, and we have to allow God to do it, but we also have to do our part. Richard Rohr says, when he was talking about this in his book, he says, no one catches the wild ass by running after him. yet only those who run after the wild ass ever catch him. There is this place where we must do our part. If we don't do anything, then nothing ever changes. We must plant a seed, but we can't make the flower grow, which is that second part of that verse in Philippians is that it says the beginning, but it is God in you who's effectively at work in you to both will and to work, that is strengthening, energizing, and creating in you the longing and the ability to fulfill your purpose. So there's our part and there's God's part. So we keep doing our part, and our part is doing the opposite action of what that character defect is. Like in the serenity prayer, we say that God grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's the part. This is our part to change. So one of the things that I use is the spot check inventory. I use it a lot, and I'm asking myself when I come up with a resentment, am I into self-pity? Am I into any of these things if you're looking at it, it's on the left-hand side. Am I into being impatient, stubborn, resentful, critical? If I am, then what I need to do is I need to practice. I need to be willing to practice the opposite. So if I'm into self-pity, I need to be practicing, am I grateful for blessings? Like in the example that I gave, when I was impatient with my kids, then I need to practice patience. If I am domineering, I need to be considerate of others' rights. It's like with my kids. The other one I always add to it is if I am into control or into my pride and ego, that is to be humble, to be practicing humility and reminding myself. I guess that's on this list is under arrogant. So if you Google spot check inventory, you'll find a whole host of them on the website where you can, on different websites where you can look at them. But they're really, really helpful. So this step is a step that gives us actual practical work to do. But again, the result is not ours. The result is God working to remove these defects of character in us. Our part is that willingness, our willingness to do our part, and our willingness to allow God to open up a new way of life, creating in us a life that is less and less hindered and lived out from these character defects that we had. So think on these things. Get in touch with me if you have any questions. Grateful to be on this journey with you. Looking forward to talking about the next step with you. Thanks.